The southern dust of UA still coats these collected things, a silent ghost in the grain. A stillness settles, heavy with what was taken without a trace. The veil is lifting on what was lost. Preserve the record.
Where? Han Li hastily asked after he came to his senses.
There.
Following Li Feiyu's gaze, Han Li finally found a pale-faced Zhang Xiuer within the corner of the crowd. At this moment, she was standing with two other girls who were also participating in the deathmatch. Wearing thin white clothing, she slightly bit her almond lips, making her whole figure seem like a white-colored flower, lovely and fragile.
How could weak women like Lady Zhang participate in such a bloody battle? Did that one surnamed Wang make a mistake?
Han Li, who was still unwilling to believe his eyes, questioned incredulously.
Xiuer is also an inner disciple of the Seven Supreme Division. Did I not tell you before?
Li Feiyu replied, smiling bitterly as he said something that Han Li felt was unexpected. Han Li remained silent and speechless. It was clearly evident that the Seven Mysteries sect's remaining experts were few in number, and that sect leader Wang did not have any protective feelings for the fairer SX. In order to prevail in this dire situation, he even sent out a girl like Zhang Xiuer, almost as if he was planning to stake everything on this one move.
Brother, I'll get straight to the point. I want to be with Zhang Xiuer. Take care of yourself.
Li Feiyu lightly said, placing his hand onto Han Li's shoulder. He then turned his body and walked towards the arena. He hadn't even walked 2 steps before he heard a light sigh from behind him, followed closely by a fluctuation in the air. Instantly, another person appeared by his side, Han Li.
What's so big about this? Isn't it only a death contract battle? This small situation is not difficult for me to handle. Since we are friends, I can help you with this small matter.
Han Li said with a hint of a smile. Having heard this, Li Feiyu did not say anything further and exerted his strength to pat Han Li's chest, quietly saying,
Good brother. Thank you so much.
Han Li kept a smile on his face, not saying another word. It was just as he said. The reason why he followed was partly because he knew Li Feiyu for quite a long time, so their relationship was quite close. As such, Han Li was unwilling to look on helplessly as Li Feiyu ventured off by himself. On the other hand, Han Li was a highly skilled and bold individual. He did not believe that the feral Wolfgang's so-called experts could pose much of a threat to him with his fireball and imperial flight technique. On top of this, he also was a bit eager to test his own strength. The two men strode forward, squeezing through the crowd and heading straight for Wang Juechu's side. Halfway, the two ripped off their Broken Water sect uniforms, revealing their Seven Mysteries sect attires. Han Li and Li Feiyu's sudden appearance and change in identity caused both sides to stare at them foolishly. No one tried to prevent their movements, allowing them to easily arrive in front of Wang Juechu.
Division Head Li. Dr. Han.
Upon seeing Li Feiyu, Zhang Xiuer was pleased beyond expectation. Her coquettish face revealed her to be pleasantly surprised, and if the area wasn't filled with so many people, she might have thrown herself in her lover's embrace, pouring her heart out. Sect leader Wang also recognized the two individuals, his eyes revealing a trace of surprise. To him, their sudden appearance was very unexpected.
External Blade Division's Division Head Deputy Li Feiyu pays his respects to the sect leader.
The two of us wish to sign the death contract and join the deathmatch.
He directly stated his request, not waiting for the others to question him about his appearance. Meanwhile, Han Li stood to the side without making a sound, maintaining an appearance similar to that of Li Feiyu and sect leader Ma. The cold look on his face revealed a hint of a smile as he warmly said,
Very well, as expected of our Seven Mysteries sect's loyal disciples. With Division Head Li joining the battle, the sect will surely receive a better chance at victory. However, I think it would be better if Dr. Han does not join. After all, his medical expertise is very crucial to our sect. If something were to happen to him in the deathmatch, it would be a fatal loss.
Hearing these words, Han Li gave a faint smile. Sect leader Wang was surprised, and just as he was about to look in all 4 sides, he heard Han Li's lazy voice drift over from behind him.
I don't know if my own skill is worthy of sect leader Ma's attention, but if I were to enter the deathmatch, I believe that I would be able to protect myself.
Instead of waiting for Li Feiyu's explanation, he shifted slightly, causing his body to disappear right in front of sect leader Wang.
Therefore, I hope that sect leader will accept my loyalty.
Sect leader Ma's heart was overwhelmed with shock. He would have never thought that Han Li, who was renowned in the sect for his medical expertise, would also possess such a terrifying martial skill. Unexpectedly, Han Li was able to soundlessly penetrate Wang Juechu's defense and approach his back without attracting Wang Juechu's attention. Such terrifying skill. Just who exactly is this person? Hidden within our sect, just what is his purpose? A train of fearful ideas sprang forth in quick succession within Wang Juechu's mind. He turned his body and looked at the seemingly harmless Han Li. Sect leader Wang couldn't help but draw his gaze to his own three martial uncles, only to see that the three martial uncles' facial expressions had also changed slightly. Their eyes revealed a hint of shock, making it evident that Dr. Han's skill caused them to feel unrestrained fear. A series of different thoughts rushed around in sect leader Wang's mind, but he finally made a decision.
He abruptly laughed loudly before cordially saying, "Dr. Han's heart must have been wholly devoted to the sect. As the sect leader, how could I possibly refuse?"
He then used his finger to point at the two disciples whose skills were the weakest out of all of them. They stepped out of the lineup, allowing Han Li and Li Feiyu to take their places. Sect leader Wang also allowed Han Li and Li Feiyu to use black ink to write their names in the blood-red death contract, permitting them to become members of the Deathmatch. The commotion within the Seven Mysteries sect was naturally witnessed by Jia Tianlong, and even though he felt that the adding of two experts was a bit unexpected, he did not put it within his heart. After all, he believed that the fleshy body of mortals would be unable to stop Monk Goldenlight's flying sword technique. Therefore, both sides finished signing their respective death contracts and exchanging them, thus signaling the start of the deathmatch. Only one side would be able to leave alive. Before he emerged, he had already guaranteed Jia Tianlong that he alone would be sufficient to face all the challengers from the Seven Mysteries sect. But of course, the price for his services would have to be adjusted accordingly from the previously agreed amount of 5,000 taels of gold to 8,000 taels of gold. The moment when Monk Goldenlight thought about the rewards he would be receiving after the battle, a fiery heat rose in his heart. He stared disdainfully at the crowd, straining himself to hold back from slaughtering all the members of the Seven Mysteries sect. Instead of being with Li Feiyu, Han Li stood at the other side of the crowd. Since Li Feiyu and Zhang Xiuer were standing together, whispering sweet words of affection to each other, Han Li naturally would not be so rude as to intrude into the personal world of the two lovebirds.
Seriously, what is he thinking about when he is with his young lover? To think that they could still talk about their emotions and love right now when we are about to fight for the sect's survival.
Han Li felt a sour taste in his mouth. After he came back to his senses, Han Li, like the rest of the sect members, stared curiously at the dwarf standing in the arena.
The feral wolf gang's participants all hiding in the back. This is too incredible. They actually allowed such a dirty-looking dwarf to begin the fight? Could it be that the dwarf has some sort of strange and profound martial technique?
Han Li blinked his eyes as he pondered in his heart. Sect leader Wang's thoughts flowed down the same path as Han Li's. Instead of rashly allowing his sect members to swamp the arena, he selected a protector wielding a saber to test the waters. It seemed like he intended to scout out his opponent first before making a decision so that there wouldn't be any accidental casualties. Although the battle format was supposed to be a battle royal, if one side only sent out a single man, it would unquestionably become a one-on-one fight. As sect leader Wang thought about this, he decided to act as such. When Monk Goldenlight saw only a single man approaching him, he roughly knew in his heart what his opponent was thinking. The sound of a strange laughter emerged from his throat. His voice was capable of breaking apart drums, causing those who heard it to tremble uncontrollably. The protector that Wang Juechu sent out was a strong warrior more than 30 years old, with an extremely valiant appearance. His hands, wielding the saber, were tightly clustered with visible green veins. One look was sufficient enough for one to know that he was extremely proficient with the saber. Even after hearing Monk Goldenlight's strange laughter, his heart remained unshaken, which proved that he had experienced countless battles. As Monk Goldenlight saw the strong warrior approaching him, he stopped his weird laughter and nonchalantly took out a piece of yellow paper from inside his robes. The yellow paper was inscribed with words and patterns that glowed with a golden light, and Han Li could tell with a single glance that this item was extremely valuable. The dwarf ignored the approaching warrior. Instead of moving forward, he held the yellow paper in one hand and started chanting an incantation. Although the strong warrior from the Seven Mysteries sect was unsure of what mad plot his opponent was hatching, his fighting experience was incomparably vast, and he understood that it would be best to finish off the dwarf before the dwarf completed the incantation. in case the battle became disadvantageous for him. As a result, he didn't even pause to think before his body vigorously leapt into the air, drawing close to the body of Mink Golden Light with a few steps. He raised the steel saber in his hand, and with a glint of cold light, he struck against the head of his opponent. The strike was swift, ferocious, and heavy, filled with all of his strength. As soon as his eyes witnessed the edge of the saber landing on Monk Golden Light's head, the incantation had already been completed. Before the steel saber could come into contact with his body, Monk Golden Light held the piece of yellow paper against his body. Abruptly, a piercing ray of golden light flashed, emanating from the hand that held the yellow paper. This extremely golden piercing ray of light blinded the strong warrior, but he did not have the slightest hint of panic, continuing to swing his steel saber downwards. Dang! The sound of metal clashing resounded throughout the entire arena. The strong warrior felt a wave of heat from web of skin between his thumb and index finger as the saber he was wielding almost flew out of his hands, causing him to be shocked. Although both his eyes had not managed to see clearly, he knew that the situation was perilous. He tiptoed as he backtracked a distance of several zhang before pausing. Brandishing his saber, he maintained his position. At this moment, he could hear the crowd in the arena letting out gasps of shock and astonishment. The strong warrior began to get worried after hearing the crowd's reaction. He desperately wanted to know what had happened and why was his clash with the dwarf so bizarre. Fortunately, his eyes had recovered his vision and he hurriedly shifted his gaze forward, only to see the dwarf standing motionlessly several zhang ahead of him. His entire body seemed to emit an aura of golden light an inch wide around him. This golden light was akin to a thick armor, enveloping the dwarf and giving him a level of protection that was impervious to even the wind and rain. The protector's saber attack had struck the barrier of the golden light and did not manage to even wound the dwarf's body. The protector did not understand the origin of the golden light that was as tough as steel and iron. It had actually made his saber attack ineffective. Although the protector had vast amounts of experience, this was the first time he had seen such an incredible thing, causing him to be stunned. Wielding the steel saber, he was worried, not knowing whether he should advance or retreat. Not only was the protector stunned, the spectators in the crowd were astonished as well. Within Jianghu, the number of individuals who knew immortal cultivators were extremely sparse, especially within such a remote location like state of Yue. As such, the golden light manifested by the yellow paper was extremely mysterious and unfathomable to the members of the Seven Mysteries sect. Jia Tianlong felt joy in his heart as he witnessed those from the Seven Mysteries sect looking at each other with dismay. Standing at the back of the crowd was Han Li, who was even more astonished than the others. Han Li knew that on this mountain peak there was no one other than the dwarf who understood how to use magic techniques. It was obvious to him that the dwarf used an incantation similar to that of Soul Lock Talisman. However, Han Li felt that this technique was even more powerful than the Soul Lock Talisman. When no one was watching, Han Li quickly activated Heaven's Eye technique by reciting its incantations. Having activated it, he hurriedly turned his gaze in the dwarf's direction. He saw that beneath the golden aura, there was a flickering white light on the dwarf's body. When compared to the golden aura, this white light was too faint. If one was not looking for it, he or she would have most likely not been able to notice its existence. This dwarf was actually an immortal cultivator whose magic power was much lower than Han Li's. This caused Han Li to be delighted and anguished at the same time. He was delighted because, as a beginner, his magic power was richer when compared to the dwarf's, which signified that the dwarf had merely dabbled in immortal cultivation. Han Li also felt anguished because he did not know whether or not the dwarf knew any other magic techniques of which he was not aware. As such, he was not sure if he would be able to handle the dwarf. In that moment, the three men standing near sect leader Wang had a great change in expression and started talking amongst themselves. It seemed that the dwarf's golden light was not something to be trifled with. Covered by the golden light, the dwarf started laughing with his head facing the sky.
This venerable master is standing here motionlessly and will allow you to attack as you please. If there is no one here capable of breaking this monk's gold barrier, then not a single one of your insignificant lives will be spared.
After this was said, he gave an arrogant sneer. Monk Golden Light's speech had thoroughly changed the Seven Mysteries sect disciples' apprehension into rage. Immediately, many valiant martial artists wanted to rush out from the crowd and charge straight toward the dwarf. However, sect leader Wang stopped them. Wang Juechu waved his arm, signaling the protectors at the scene to return. Then he said a few words to the tall and sturdy man, who nodded his head and walked step by step toward to the dwarf, upright and unafraid. As the dwarf saw the fully bearded man walking toward him, a malicious gaze flashed in his eyes. Because his natural body was deformed, he had been ridiculed since a young age. As a result, he especially detested bold individuals with tall and lofty figures. This man before him fell within his scope of resentment. He was already thinking of what cruel method he should use to torment him. The bare-chested man was one of Zhang Xiuer's 3 martial uncles. If one did not see his full bearded face, they would have thought him to be an oaf. However, his true age had already passed a cycle of 60 years. He used to be known as a valiant and brave individual in the 7 Mystery Sect, killing countless enemies for the sake of the sect. Confronted with this strange golden barrier, he naturally would not act rashly. This person examined the barrier and glanced at Monk Golden Light protected within. He cracked a smile, and with 2 extended fingers, he flicked the golden barrier, causing a clear
Dang sound.
This frivolous act agitated Monk Golden Light.
Do you wish for this immortal master to send you to an early reincarnation?
As the martial uncle listened to these words, his expression changed. He unexpectedly strode forward a single step, arriving at the dwarf's side. Lifting his leg once more, he appeared behind the dwarf. In order to get to the mind of Monk Golden Light, the martial uncle circled around him with long strides and increasingly faster revolutions. In a blink of an eye, his figure became indistinct. Monk Golden Light was incapable of seeing him clearly. Monk Golden Light had become dizzy from the opponent's continuous rotations, causing the fury in his heart to intensify. Without taking the time to think, he brought his hand to the inside of his robe, seemingly with the intention to take something out. Just then, the circling bearded man naturally took notice of his opponent's actions. He suddenly let out a long whistle that resembled a dragon's cry and a tiger's hiss. The whistle was both strong and lengthy. It shook the ears of everyone on Setting Sun's summit with a droning noise that also affected leaves and branches of the trees nearby. After Monk Golden Light heard the whistle, his shaking hands were rendered powerless. His hand stretched toward his bosom, but unexpectedly he did not withdraw it. Suddenly, the sharp, loud sounds of bursting joints came from the bearded man. They grew more and more hurried until finally the sounds were like the winds and rain of a torrential storm. The sounds had even covered the whistling. The bearded man had circled to the front of the dwarf and stopped. He then stopped whistling, and the sound of his joints bursting had stopped. At this moment, those who were clear-headed discovered that the bearded man's body had changed dramatically since his revolutions. The muscles on his chest and arms were greatly bulging outwards and were pure black as if cast in living iron. When compared to the dwarf, it was as if he were a giant. While Monk Golden Light was gasping for air, he took out a thin, long box from his bosom. This wooden box was completely dark and was covered by a paper talisman that sealed the contents. Without waiting for the dwarf to tear off the paper talisman, the gigantic spirited man extended his huge hand like a palm leaf fan, and without politeness, he ruthlessly smashed against the golden light. The strike rocked the barrier, deforming it and causing the dwarf to sway incessantly, making the unstable dwarf incapable of tearing off the paper talisman. Monk Golden Light's mind was overwhelmed with shock. He was fully aware of the might of the golden barrier surrounding him. This man was actually capable of striking and deforming it, which required a great amount of godly force. The contempt in his heart could not help but almost entirely vanish. His hands moved more quickly to tear off the paper talisman. With the sound of tearing paper, the talisman had finally been ripped off. Monk Golden Light's face showed an expression of joy. He then heard a
Thump.
As the bearded man unleashed strikes against the golden barrier in quick succession. The dwarf's body swayed accordingly and was unable to remain standing, causing his buttocks to fall to the floor. Only at this moment did he discover that the man had used both hands and legs to assault the golden barrier like a squall. His current golden barrier was the same as kneaded dough, with the opponent's punches and kicks creating new dents, bulges, and warped deformations on the barrier. It seemed that the layer of golden light could break at any moment underneath the martial uncle's fierce assault. Seeing this, Monk Golden Light's expression drastically changed. Flustered, he was no longer capable of maintaining the poise of an immortal master, and instead proceeded to chant an incantation. Unfortunately, he had made many errors in this hurried attempt, so there wasn't the slightest result. That black box hadn't moved even a jolt. In the back, Jia Tianlong saw everything and was somewhat amazed. On one hand, he was amazed by Monk Golden Light's idiotic actions and obliviousness. On the other hand, he felt awe as he witnessed the martial prowess belonging to Zhang Xiuer's martial uncle, who could test the power of the golden barrier belonging to Monk Golden Light. The barrier could truly be considered impervious to sword and spear. Water and fire couldn't penetrate it either, similar to its ineffectiveness against a diamond-hard shield. Unexpectedly, this golden barrier was trembling greatly under this person's punches and kicks, and accumulated deformations according to the martial uncle's wishes. This was truly inconceivable. This man's skill was a great and profound mystery. He recalled that there still existed 2 more similar experts in addition to the bearded man. For the first time since he had rashly agreed to the opponent's deathmatch, Jia Tianlong felt slightly regretful. He now understood why the opposition had requested a deathmatch with complete confidence. Wang Juechu actually had these 3 freakish experts to rely on. If Jia Tianlong were in his shoes, he would have also requested a bloody battle. Thinking of this, Jia Tianlong looked at the disadvantaged dwarf. He already considered whether or not he should send assistance to this self-proclaimed immortal master to avoid having this expert die such a muddle-headed death without even using his flying swords technique. From the situation in the arena, it seemed that the violent man held an absolute advantage. However, no one knew that this particular person, who seemed to be incomparably mighty, was actually secretly grumbling to himself. Every fist he unleashed caused a portion of the barrier of golden light to cave in. The impacts fiercely vibrated the barrier. It would only be a matter of time before the barrier would be totally destroyed. But no one knew that every time the man's fists had come into contact with the golden light, the man could feel a sharp wave of rebound energy that seemed to reciprocate the strength he used. Currently, all 4 of his limbs were grievously damaged. He knew that once the effects of his skill faded, all of his limbs would probably be immensely swollen. In addition, the barrier of golden light had an insane recovery rate. After a short while, the portions that he caved in with his attacks would immediately return back to their original shapes, as if the barrier was never damaged in the first place. Moreover, his previous attacks were aimed randomly at the barrier of golden light, merely causing its shape to be distorted. But other than that, there seemed to be no other effect on the barrier whatsoever. The tall and sturdy man continued in this manner for a period of time, while the barrier of golden light vibrated intensely, as if it would break apart at any moment. Now, the thoughts of everyone present went in the opposite direction. They understood that this tall and sturdy man's attacks were unable to destroy the golden barrier. His immense strength would at most be able to create some dents on the barrier, but it would not able to completely destroy it. So not only did Jia Tianlong abolish the idea of sending reinforcements, but the dwarf also regained his former composure. But because he had embarrassed himself earlier, Monk Golden Light's features seemed to have a trace of embarrassment, and as he stared at the strong and sturdy man, his gaze became increasingly malevolent. But because he was suffering the barrage of attacks from his opponent, his body was unable to stand straight, and every magic technique he intended to cast misfired. As such, he stopped his incantations and stared intently at his opponent while muttering a string of curses under his breath in an unknown language. As for the tall and sturdy man, he did not feel any changes, so he continued frenziedly attacking the golden barrier. The spectators all thought that this individual had boundless energy and would never need to rest. Clang, clang, clatter. Exerting his full strength, that ferocious man unleashed 2 strikes and a kick before turning his back in retreat. That massive frame of his did not seem to hinder his speed. The man's actions caused the spectators to be shocked. A commotion arose shortly after. Monk Golden Light was shocked as well, but he swiftly flew into a rage. He hurriedly sat down and crossed his legs. Placing a black box horizontally onto his lap, he began to mumble an incantation. Both his hands were extended in front of his chest in a strange position as he shivered forcefully, expending a seemingly tremendous amount of energy. Looking at the violent convulsions shaking the dwarf's body, everyone present thought it was as if all the fingers on his hands possessed the strength of 1,000 jinn. At this moment, the tall and sturdy man had already left the area designated for the 7 Mysteries sect, as if he wanted to retreat back to the crowd. However, he suddenly heard a loud voice from behind his back.
Rise.
He saw the face of Wang Juechu, who was standing in front of him, fall drastically as the audience collectively shouted out,
Be careful.
The tall and sturdy man trembled as he hurriedly dodged to the left and cast a side glance at the dwarf, only to see a ray of gray light swiftly approaching his previous position, missing him by a narrow margin. His heart froze, but he relaxed, since he had managed to dodge this hidden weapon attack. He would be reunited with his 2 senior martial uncles soon, and could then take a breather. But before he had even completed this thought, he he felt an extreme pain in his right arm. As he turned his gaze, another exclamation of shock could be heard from the audience. Within that cacophony of noise, the voices of his two senior martial uncles were heard, filled with immense worry and apprehension. That man was slightly stunned, as if he did not understand what had happened. At this moment, he saw another ray of gray light appear in his line of sight, piercing through his chest. Looking at the shape of the weapon, it appeared to be the same hidden weapon that he had dodged earlier. The man was shocked and angered. He wanted to open his mouth to say something, but as the sound,
Putong,
rang out, his body collapsed on the ground. It was only at this moment that the man realized that his right arm had already been broken without him being aware. Fresh blood flowed unceasingly from the wound.
what happened?
The man asked, his stomach full of confusion and unwillingness. But soon after, his vision went black as his consciousness faded into oblivion. Even until the point of death, he was not able to understand what had happened. But the members from both the Feral Wolf Gang and the Seven Mysteries sect were able to see clearly what had happened. From what they understood after Monk Golden Light had finished his incantation and shouted,
Rise.
a ray of gray light shot forth from the black box, spiraling around the head of the dwarf before following the direction that his finger was pointing in and flying towards that tall and sturdy man. Although the man dodged out of reflex, avoiding the strike through his chest, he had no way to avoid the attack that was directed to the back of his arm. It seemed that the ray of gray light was incredibly sharp. Even after slicing his arm, the man still had no knowledge or realization that something had happened. Afterwards, the crowd was even more astounded. After the ray of gray light was avoided, it continued following the finger movements of the dwarf, flying far ahead in front of the warrior, and abruptly changed directions. It pierced straight through the chest of the defenseless man and easily robbed him of his life. Everyone was stunned into silence by what had just occurred, and instinctively fixed their gazes on the ray of gray light that had returned to the dwarf and was now spiraling above the dwarf's head. The words,
Flying sword.
appeared involuntarily in the majority of the spectators' minds. Although these people did not know about the existence of immortal cultivators, even they had heard of the various legends and miraculous stories of flying swords. This ray of gray light was extremely similar to the rumored flying sword used by the legendary immortals. Could the unsightly dwarf be one of the fabled sword immortals? The majority of the crowd fixated their gazes, now filled with respect, at the dwarf. The title of Sword Immortal was enough to cause many mortals to be filled with fear. Monk Golden Light now held his head high with his chest out, considering himself to be unparalleled in this world. He manipulated the ray of gray light to soar above his head in a wild dance until it resembled a huge gray python, causing exclamations of awe to come out from the Feral Wolf Gang. On the other hand, those representing the Seven Mysteries sect were speechless and downcast. Imminent defeat was apparent in their hearts. If one were to say that the morale of Jia Tianlong's men was greatly increased while that of the Seven Mysteries sect was greatly diminished, he or she would not be wrong. After all, Jia Tianlong had managed to enlist the aid of a sword immortal. Han Li was the only one in the crowd who felt extreme joy in his heart. Han Li realized that this Monk Golden Light's flying sword technique was exactly the same as the telekinesis technique that he himself had learned. Although he did not know if the ray of gray light was indeed a sword, he knew that telekinesis technique could only control tangible objects. This fact was undeniable. Currently, Han Li's heart surged with the intent to fight. It seemed that his interest towards this fellow immortal cultivator was growing increasingly high. Two men quickly jumped out from the Seven Mysteries sect's side. After they jumped from the crowd without saying anything, they rushed straight toward the dwarf as quick as lightning. They were Wang Juechu's two remaining martial uncles. These two men wore grieving expressions. It was obvious that the tall and sturdy man's death had greatly saddened them. As a result, they felt endless loathing for Monk Golden Light and paid no attention to his sword's transcendent movements. They were consumed by the thirst to kill the opponent and take revenge on behalf of their fallen comrade. Sect leader Wang had originally planned to block their reckless actions, but acknowledged that this dwarf, capable of mystic techniques, had to be confronted sooner or later. These two martial uncles were the only ones capable of threatening the dwarf. Rather than blocking them now, it would be better to take advantage of his martial uncle's desire for revenge and have them clash with the dwarf immediately. Thinking of this, Wang Juechu swallowed the words that he was about to say to call them back. Monk Golden Light had learned his lesson not long ago and did not dare to look down on these opponents. He propelled the gray light toward the two with one finger. The gray light immediately changed into a long beam of light and flew directly towards them. The uncle, who resembled a scholar, immediately suspected that the flying sword's gray light would fly toward them. He raised an eyebrow and raised his hand, launching a thin silver line from his sleeve. It collided against the gray streak of light head-on, stopping it for a second. However, the gray streak of light then rushed forward, as if nothing had happened. It seemed that the silver line did not have much of an effect. The others could not clearly discern the nature of the silver line, but with the extreme eyesight bestowed upon him by the eternal spring arts, Han Li was able to see it very clearly. It consisted of tens of silver needles fired off in succession in a straight line. However, he did not know what method the scholar had used. Such a powerful technique, capable of violently launching out many thin, feather-like needles, had greatly interested Han Li. Seeing that the silver needles had no effect, the scholar did not panic and instead began revolving his body like a spinning top. Immediately after, his revolving silhouette ejected countless cold beams of light varying in size that split into two parts. One portion turned into a silver stream that directly struck the gray light, producing a sharp crackling sound as they hit each other. Unfortunately, it was unable to destroy the gray streak of light. The other portion flew straight towards the dwarf, colliding against the golden barrier.
Ding, ding.
The impact itself was a spectacular sight. The gray streak of light launched itself against the silver stream, causing an unending amount of debris fragments to fall. Because they were completely shattered, one could no longer make out their original appearance, but the objects that ricocheted off the golden barrier were intact, only taking minimal damage. These objects formed the silver stream and consisted of a few throwing knives, prayer beads, iron lotus seeds, metal coins, and a myriad of concealed weapons. There were even a few unfamiliar items that could not be named. Monk Goldenlight was slightly surprised. However, he immediately curled his lips and thought that these mundane, common metal weapons could not possibly fend off his treasure for long.
Tai.
A huge shout like that of spring thunder resonated through the arena, shocking everyone present and leaving them in awe. At this moment, everyone discovered that the gray-clothed man, who had originally rushed out alongside the scholar, had drawn the precious sword from his back at an unknown moment and was steadily walking toward the gray light. About 2 inches of light emanated from the tip of the sword that he was holding. The light continuously grew and shrank, giving off a menacingly cold air.
Sword point.
It was unknown who had first shouted the name of this supreme sword skill that every swordsman would yearn for, even in their dreams. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Passion flared both from inside and outside the stage. If one were to say flying swords were but a rumor from legend, then sword point would be a legend of Jianghu that all swordmen would yearn for. Currently, not only did sword point and flying swords appear in succession, but also their immediate confrontation. How could anyone not burn with anger at being unable to witness such a scene? This was a moment that could make life feel worthwhile. At this moment, however, Jia Tianlong was not excited with the crowd. Instead, those around him felt a cold aura being released as he felt the flow of cold sweat. Only now did he understand what it felt like to be terrified in hindsight. Although he previously knew the Seven Mysteries sect was hiding 3 great experts, he did not anticipate that this expert would have a great enough skill that he would be able to use sword point. Had he not requested this monk golden light to act, Jia Tianlong feared that this gray-clothed person, capable of using sword point, could kill each and every person on his side. While Jia Tianlong's frightened expression paled, the gray-clothed man had already arrived below the gray streak of light. At this moment, it was unknown whether the scholar had exhausted his supply of hidden weapons or the scholar had deliberately stopped. But the scholar's bodily rotation halted all of a sudden, breaking the silver stream that was pushing against the gray light. No longer facing any resistance, the gray light naturally fell towards the head of the gray-clothed man. The gray-clothed man grasped his sword with both hands and fearlessly leaped high into the air. He waved the point of his sword and ferociously struck the gray light. A clear
Dang. Sound spread through the air.
The gray-clothed man fell to the ground from mid-air and staggered back several steps. Soon after, he opened his mouth and spouted out a mouthful of blood, his expression becoming dispirited and listless. The first 3 inches of the longsword in his hand had disappeared and turned into a flat bulge. The gray streak suffered through this strike like a shot bird and fell from the sky. Even after landing in the dust, the gray light's brilliance did not wane. Instead, it continued pulsing incessantly, appearing intact and completely vigorous. Seeing this event, both crowds simultaneously cried out in surprise. However, the members of the Seven Mysteries sect's cries were brimming with joy, while Jian Tianlong's side was brimming with worry. The scholar was also elated, but he hesitated for a moment as he looked at the winded gray-clothed man and the eyes of the dwarf. Nevertheless, his body flew towards the dwarf, preparing to dispatch the enemy. Without waiting for the scholar to fly out even a few steps, the gray-clothed man suddenly yelled from behind,
Quick! Dodge!
The scholar's mind was startled, but he immediately began to move. However, he felt a cool sensation from his neck and saw the gray light fly past him. He witnessed a headless body run forward a few steps that soon fell to the floor. The back of that body seemed exceedingly familiar. As the scholar thought of this, his consciousness quickly faded. Monk Golden Light was completely arrogant at this moment. He once again commanded the gray light on the ground to suddenly rise and fly towards the gray-clothed man, the sole survivor of the three experts. He was immensely proud of the small scheme he used to get rid of the scholar. Just as he planned to immediately kill what was left of the Seven Mysteries sect after killing this gray-clothed man, he suddenly heard a sentence from a figure within the crowd.
This thing of yours flying about, I've grown fond of it. How about you give it to me and let me play with it?
Just as he heard this, he felt a formidable spiritual power approach his gray light and forcibly sever his connection with it, snatching it away from his control. The gray light that was originally flying toward the gray-clothed man turned in midair and flew into the crowd. Wherever the gray light went, people lost their heads in fear and were dodging it all over the place. Only a common-looking youth of only 17 to 18 years stood unmoving from his original spot. This youth smiled toward Monk Golden Light for a moment, exposing his pure white teeth that contrasted against his tan skin. He then pointed to the gray light, which obediently fell into his hand.
An immortal cultivator.
Originally, when they saw the gray light turn and fly towards the crowd from the Seven Mysteries sect, they believed the midget had changed his mind, intending to first kill off the rest of the humble martial art disciples and then handle the gray-clothed person. Who would have imagined that the gray streak would fly into the crowd and actually land on the hand of a seemingly ordinary disciple, who effortlessly received it? This was far too much to believe. The Seven Mysteries sect's side, including sect leader Wang and the gray-clothed man, felt both pleasantly surprised and relieved from the unexpected rescue. Wang Juechu was in ecstasy and was even more glad that he had the foresight to agree to let Han Li participate in the deathmatch. He knew that the survival of the participants in the deathmatch, as well as the survival of the Seven Mysteries sect, would henceforth depend entirely on this profoundly mysterious Dr. Han Li. Li Feiyu had understood what Han Li had stolen. At this moment, his mouth had dropped open and did not close for a while. Although he knew his close friend was somewhat outstanding, to be able to take away the immortal cultivator's flying sword was a feat Li Feiyu could only dream of, making him absolutely giddy. This actually went as far as to make Zhang Xiuer, Elder Li, and the opposing Jia Tianlong wide-eyed and speechless. Each of their facial expressions was very wonderful to behold. Numerous gazes were shot out, included fear, doubt, and pleasant surprise, but all of them fell onto Han Li. Han Li had a smooth expression and was smiling all along. It seemed that he did not have even the slightest care for the spectators' attentive gazes. However, no one knew that behind that calm appearance, his mind was filled with endless depression. Only the heavens knew that Han Li absolutely did not want to take action. His original plan was to wait for the dwarf to negligently drop his golden barrier and then mount a sneak attack. Until then, he would conceal himself in the rear and use very small fireballs to easily kill the opposition. But who would have thought that the plan of the heavens would supersede that of men? Han Li, from simply seeing the gray streak fly about, had stirred an uncomfortable irritation and unconsciously used a technique he had learned earlier through endless practice.
Telekinesis technique.
The result was an easy seizure of the object. Such a simple seizure was greatly unexpected. Han Li simply extended his magic power towards the gray streak and easily erased the dwarf's spiritual power, establishing a connection between him and the gray light. On one hand, Han Li had effortlessly seized control of the opponent's treasure and was secretly delighted. On the other hand, he now had no choice but to confront the dwarf, making him somewhat uneasy. He clearly understood he did not possess enough force to break the opponent's tortoise shell. The only thing giving him comfort was that his magic power had exceeded his opponent's several times over. Of course, the slightest sign of unease could not be seen in Han Li's expression. That was because he was fully aware that if one held the psychological high ground, Then they would possess a great advantage in a true confrontation and would somewhat increase the odds of success out of thin air. This was a trick he had learned from within the blinking sword art manuals. As a result, after recognizing the dwarf as a great enemy, Han Li showed the opposite and instead showed an expression of having a card up his sleeve. He leisurely moved the treasure he had just taken back and forth in his hands. The gray streak remained spirited, and its length was indeterminate, its true form still unclear. Han Li raised his head to take a glance at the somewhat pale dwarf and slightly smiled. He lightly rubbed the gray streak in between his hands. The gray streak's brilliance was immediately exhausted, revealing its true appearance. It was actually a Taoist paper talisman. In addition, a picture of a small gray sword was drawn on this peculiar talisman. The small gray sword on the paper talisman was drawn vividly and lifelike, as if it were real. In addition, there was no magic power urging the small sword to move, yet it emitted a faint flowing light on its own, as if it were an exceptionally sharp sword. Its cold aura was menacing. However, he had second thoughts regarding this Taoist talisman. Recalling the previous great display of its outstanding mysterious power, he felt somewhat satisfied. After all, its ferociousness was seen with his own eyes. He was certain it will be quite useful later on. Han Li easily pocketed the talisman in his bosom. He didn't dare to swaggeringly use this item in front of its previous owner. Who knows what tricks the opponent could do with the talisman? In addition, he was quite unfamiliar with the telekinesis technique, having never practiced it on a suitable object. He supposed that if he were to use this object now, it would be very difficult to injure his opponent with it. Across from him, Monk Golden Light stared helplessly as Han Li pocketed the treasure he had taken from him. He could not help but become furious, but he did not have the courage to step forward and tear it away from him. It should be known that since the opponent was able to easily erase his spiritual power from the talisman, his opponent's magic power should be several times deeper than his own. He truly did not have the courage to contest against him. Han Li saw that the dwarf was strained. Monk Golden Light was clearly angry, but did not dare to speak, knowing that he was already subdued by his opponent. Not knowing who was superior, Han Li's nerves couldn't help but want to settle this matter even more. Finally, deciding to be a fox masquerading as a tiger, Han Li exerted the imperial flight technique on his body. His figure flashed several times until he arrived in front of the dwarf. Seeing Han Li move in the way that gods appeared and demons vanished, Monk Golden Light grew even more fearful.
What are you going to do? I'm not conquering this region's resources, nor did I take any spiritual herbs or immortal elixirs. I only received a few of these mortals' gold, nothing more. Furthermore, I didn't violate your local clan's interests. You have no reason to kill me.
Hearing these words, Han Li was secretly delighted. He knew the opponent had mistaken him as a representative of some immortal cultivation clan. His confidence suddenly rose a bit. He deliberately gave a faint smile, and soon after, he feigned a mysterious identity and softly asked,
I don't know who your excellency is. Why have you taken the initiative to participate in mortal affairs and disturb the local order of the secular realm? This puts my clan in a difficult position.
Hearing the opponent's mind town and thinking that Han Li lacked the intention to dispose of him, the dwarf immediately roused his spirit. His two small eyeballs spun around in several circles, and he hastily said in an evasive manner,
I am a disciple of the Yi clan from the Xianxia mountain range. I was simply passing by. Because I was an old friend of the feral wolf gang's commander, I couldn't resist their plea and decided to help them out. By no means did I have any intention of deliberately offending your clan. Brother, I hope you'll forgive me. What is the name of your noble clan? In the future, this humble man will certainly visit your clan to apologize for this offense.
As if he could draw support from the words he just spoke, the tone of his voice also got more bold. It seemed like he was extremely confident about the fame associated with the name Yi clan from the Xianxia mountain range. Seeing how courageous the dwarf became all of a sudden, Han Li knew that the Yi clan had to be a famous immortal clan. However, even though the dwarf had such an impressive backing, he had still panicked during the start of the fight and made mistakes that clearly showed that he did not lie. He was just a nobody within the immortal clan. His life or death held no significance to the clan, which would not stir even if he perished. Han Li made his judgment within a few short moments. In his heart, he had already decided to finish off his opponent, since he knew that there wouldn't be any future repercussions. This deduction destroyed the last thread of sympathy within Han Li, whose heart began to surge increasingly with a strong murderous intent. After all, his opponent's magic power could not be compared to Han Li's, Even the dwarf's movements and actions were that of an idiot, despite the dwarf being an immortal cultivator.
Qin Yeling Yi clan. Could it be he's from that famous clan?
Surprise appeared on Han Li's face, as if he believed the dwarf's words.
It's exactly that Yi clan. Brother, you've actually heard of the Yi clan, so I believe you won't purposely make things difficult for me.
Seeing how the great name of the Yi clan affected Han Li, the dwarf started to boast and speak in a loud voice.
Yi clan?
Han Li pretended to hesitate as he scratched his head, displaying an expression of contemplation. Upon seeing this situation, joy bloomed in that dwarf's heart. He immediately rushed to the side and frenziedly hit the drum, creating a cacophony of noise. He was extremely afraid that the situation would turn out disadvantageous for him if this dragged on.
How about this? I will bring you to see one of the clan's elders, and we'll let the upper management decide how we should deal with this. How about it, brother?
Han Li replied as if he was being put into a difficult position.
No need for such troubles. This is just a small matter. If you want the elders to get involved in such a small affair, I'm afraid it would leave a bad impression in the eyes of the elder and would be greatly detrimental to your future progress.
The moment the dwarf heard Han Li's reply, he couldn't help but jump in shock. He hurriedly put on a caring face, trying to dissuade Han Li. Monk Golden Light saw Han Li as an inexperienced young immortal cultivator who was traveling to gain worldly experience. He thought that Han Li had always been trapped inside his clan and made to cultivate. The only possible explanation for Han Li's youthful age and his profound magic power was that he had only recently come out to the secular world.
Thank you, brother, for your reminder.
Han Li appeared very touched, lowering his head as he pondered. Extending his arms, he took out the talisman with the picture of a small sword etched over it.
This is the first time I met you, but brother has already shown such great care for me. I think I shall return this treasure to you, its original owner.
Deceptively, Han Li spoke in a sincere tone, although there were some lingering traces of unwillingness in his expression. The dwarf was extremely happy. To think that the immortal cultivator in front of him was so naive that he would want to return the treasure that the dwarf had just lost. Afraid that any hesitation would cause Han Li to change his mind, the dwarf stopped thinking further about it and hurriedly decided. As he waved his hands, the golden barrier around him dissolved completely.
Since brother is so sincere, I will no longer be polite.
Seeing the dwarf had extended his hand in an attempt to grab the talisman, Han Li's expression abruptly underwent a huge change.
Clan leader, why has this esteemed elder arrived at this place?
Upon hearing this, the dwarf froze, so frightened that he no longer cared about the treasure. He turned his head around, but there was no one there, only silence.
Oh shit.
No matter how stupid the dwarf was, he knew that he had fallen for Han Li's trap. Hurriedly turning back his head, he could only feel a hot sensation near his chest. Soon after, flames started rising up his body, covering him in a sea of flames. In the blink of an eye, the dwarf was incinerated into ashes. After this moment, Han Li let out a long sigh and retracted the hand that he had used to shoot out the fireball earlier. Using the small fireball technique and killing his opponent with a single move, the whole process seemed extremely simple, but he had actually expended a great deal of effort under a lot of pressure in order to come up with this plan. Now that his sneak attack had succeeded, a joyful smile broke out on his face, and he praised himself silently. Jia Tianlong and Wang Juechu had clearly seen what happened just now, but they did not understand what they saw. Because neither Han Li nor the dwarf was willing to let others listen in to their conversation, they had spoken in extremely low tones. The spectators were too far away, and thus were unable to hear their voices. They only knew that upon seeing Han Li, the dwarf got extremely afraid. But after exchanging a few sentences, the dwarf appeared to be sincerely begging Han Li for something. During the final moments, they saw that when the dwarf's back was turned, Han Li had abruptly unleashed a fireball and incinerated the feral wolf gang's backer, easily disintegrating him into a layer of white dust. Jia Tianlong felt a bitter taste in his mouth, so bitter that it seeped deep into his heart. How could this have happened? Originally, the outcome was in their favor, but why did it end up like this? After this unremarkable disciple of the Seven Mysteries sect appeared, everything was suddenly turned upside down. Even Monk Golden Light, an immortal cultivator, was burned to a state where he couldn't be any more than dead. On the other hand, Wang Juechu's emotions were naturally opposite from that of his great enemy. He tightly gripped to the hilt of his long sword that was placed on his waist, and was looking over with an excited expression. Squatting in an ungraceful posture, he looked at Han Li, who easily swept away the dwarf, while showing a fervent expression on his face. The current Han Li was very excited. However, this was not just excitement from winning against the dwarf. From Monk Golden Light's ashes, he discovered a few items that had not been burned into ashes. There weren't many items, only a talisman, a command medallion, and a book. The talisman was the one that the dwarf had used to erect the golden barrier. Although Han Li did not know the incantation, it was still sufficient enough to drive him wild with joy. Currently, the thing that he needed most of all was a protective measure that could be used to save his life. The command medallion was a black, triangular-shaped object. On one side, there were golden words carved upon it, Immortal Ascension, while on the other side, the word command was engraved in silver. The entire command medallion didn't seem to be made from metal, but it was heavy and solid to the touch. Han Li had no idea what it could be used for. And as for that book, Han Li knew that this had to be some extraordinary object, given the fact that it wasn't burned into a crisp after he unleashed his fireball technique. But after flipping through a few pages, he realized that this book was actually a genealogical record of some sort, a record of those that were surnamed Qin. Han Li did not know what this had to do with Monk Golden Light, nor why it was so important that the dwarf carried it in his possession.
This dwarf said that he was a disciple from the Yi clan, but he brought along a genealogical record of those who were surnamed Qin. Could he be a bastard child of the Yi clan?
Greatly disappointed, Han Li made a few malicious guesses. However, Han Li still collected them without a trace of politeness. Han Li then stood up and brushed off the dust on his body. Using a smile that wasn't truly a smile, he looked toward Jia Tianlong and the rest of the feral wolf gang.
Do you intend to break your own meridians, or would you rather have me personally send you off?
Han Li's tone was very polite, but the meaning of his words did not give the feral wolf gang the slightest amount of leeway. Hearing these words, Jia Tianlong felt an extraordinary cold feeling permeating through his body and freezing his entire face. He constantly warned himself to remain calm and that there would be a method to deal with this man. However, he could not help but wipe his forehead that was covered by a layer of cold sweat. Jia Tianlong forced a bitter smile, knowing that he didn't need a mirror to know that his current complexion was, without a doubt, extremely unsightly. With great effort, he turned his head around to look at everyone from the feral wolf gang, only to find that the complexions of his men were also pale. All of them were frightened and wore expressions that foretold the imminent arrival of a great catastrophe. These people were at a loss, not knowing what to do. The slightest will to fight could not be seen in their panic-stricken eyes. Jia Tianlong was dispirited. Facing the Seven Mysteries sect, he looked at his archenemy, Wang Juechu, who was coldly gazing back with a look that could kill. For the most part, the rest of the crowd had hateful expressions and a thirst for revenge. Jia Tianlong was at a loss. As he unconsciously looked outside of the deathmatch arena, his gaze fell upon his originally loyal and devout subordinates. The previous feelings that they had had and what their expressions currently expressed had nothing in common with each other. There were some who were anxious and others who were aloof, but the majority of them had unexpectedly cheerful expressions. They were all whispering in each other's ears, evidently feeling pleasure from Jia Tianlong's misfortune.
This will not do. We ourselves will decide whether or not we will die here. We will survive and continue to complete our hegemony.
It was unknown whose expression it was that touched Jia Tianlong's nerve, but frenzy suddenly flashed through his eyes.
Men, come! Iron Guards, advance and prepare your crossbows.
The rest of you, wait for your orders. All of a sudden, Jia Tianlong loudly bellowed with a great amount of inner strength. Jia Tianlong was worthy of being a commander. Even though the men participating in the deathmatch were previously at their wits' end, his roar that contained inner strength roused all their spirits, making the men seem as if they had just woken from a dream. Regardless of whether they were from the feral wolf gang or just experts of a small faction, they all had a pillar of support. One after another, they wiped their fists and rubbed their palms, adopting a determination to fight to the death. Han Li slightly wrinkled his eyebrow and gave a light snort. With his hands behind his back, he slowly walked towards Jia Tianlong.
It seems like I still have to waste a few more movements.
Han Li thought while laughing to himself.
Fire the crossbows.
Seeing his opponent enter into range, Jia Tianlong licked his dry lips and gave the order without hesitation. Immediately, hundreds of green steel crossbow bolts fiercely shot toward Han Li. They formed a large mass in front of Han Li, preventing even the wind and rain from passing through. an astonishing scene occurred. When Jia Tianlong saw the Han Li across from him face the oncoming crossbow bolts, the youth did not have the slightest amount of fear. Instead, he gave Jia Tianlong a strange smile before his body began to blur. Those approaching crossbow bolts passed through Han Li's figure without the slightest obstruction and flew off into the distance. In that split second, it was as if his body was incorporeal. Soon after, underneath the full light of day, his body shook several times and disappeared without a trace. Jia Tianlong's complexion ashamed. Just as he instructed his subordinates to be careful, Han Li had suddenly appeared only a few dozen steps away from them. Without waiting for Jia Tianlong to give the order, the Iron Guards disorderly shot out arrows from their crossbows once more. This time, the bolts were followed by flying knives, sleeve-sprung bolts, and a number of other hidden weapons. Combined, they were like a swarm of bees shooting towards Han Li. The attack made these people look at each other in dismay. Their opponent was no longer in their sight, having disappeared without a trace. Just as Jia Tianlong became alarmed, he suddenly heard two miserable shrieks from behind him. He was taken aback and immediately turned around. He saw two Iron Guards near him turn into human fireballs. He also saw that the youth who had earlier disappeared now had his palms pressed against the guards' bodies. In the instant his palm left their bodies, the two Iron Guards had already turned to ash. As the youth's palms parted, Jia Tianlong faintly saw a flickering red light from the center of his hand, but he didn't know what astonishing technique Han Li had used. What Jia Tianlong saw was a demonstration of magic techniques and martial arts being perfectly used simultaneously. A red light glowed from both of his hands. Each glowing light was a small fireball from the fireball technique. Han Li slowly circulated magic power through his body, returning the small fireballs to their original size. Then his figure disappeared once more and immediately reappeared at other end of the crowd. Once again, another feral wolf gang member was turned into a raging fireball. In this manner, Han Li intermittently disappeared and reappeared within the crowd. Each time he appeared, there was a victim. Regardless of where he touched the victim with his hand, that person would immediately combust and thoroughly disappear from the world. Jia Tianlong blankly looked ahead with eyes that lacked even the slightest spirit. His complexion turned ash-gray like that of a corpse. In that short moment, more than half had died under Han Li's hand. Those remaining felt insecure, and one after another they began to flee in every direction. However, in the face of the opponent's ghost-like body technique, these people were reduced to ash, one after another. By the time he was down to his last subordinate, Jia Tianlong's fiery spirit was already smothered. The commander of the feral wolf gang had become completely numb. He knew that the fact that he was not touched by Han Li up until now was a meaningless facade, deliberately upheld by his opponent. However, he was the only one remaining now, so he reckoned that the deadly fire would eventually descend onto his own head soon. Han Li did not let Commander Jia Tianlong wait any longer. After he got rid of the commander's last subordinate, Han Li did not hesitate and immediately flashed behind Jia Tianlong. Han Li gave Jia Tianlong preferential treatment by sending him off with a complete fireball. After the great Jia Tianlong was delivered to the next world, Han Li clapped his hands and softly said to himself,
It seems that killing this many people is not too difficult of a matter. I told you earlier to settle it yourselves. That would have been much better. There would have been less suffering as well, but you made me settle this personally. The feeling of being on fire must have certainly been unpleasant.
Regardless of whether they were members of the Seven Mysteries sect or the feral wolf gang, all of them had no hint of color on their faces as they stared at each other with expressions of dread and fear. Whether it was retrieving the flying sword, killing Monk Golden Light, or instantly turning Jia Tianlong's 10 bodyguards into ashes, all of these actions indicated that not only was Han Li an immortal cultivator like Monk Golden Light, but he also lacked kindness or mercy. His methods were even more cold-blooded and ruthless than that of Monk Golden Light. Thus, wherever his gaze landed, the people in the direction of his glare would lower their heads and hide. Nobody dared to meet his gaze. The current Han Li was capable of invoking fear into everyone.
Still not getting lost? Could it be that you want to stay on the mountain and have me send you off?
Han Li coldly said in the direction of the feral wolf gang members. The sound of his voice could not be considered loud, but the thousands of people currently at the mountain summit could hear him clearly, causing them to be terrified by his voice.
Quick, let's escape. If we linger here, he will burn us to death.
Simultaneously, the feral wolf gang and the rest of the invaders from the smaller sects instantly became chaotic as they pushed one another, trying to be the first to run off the mountains. The stream of people rushing down caused the small mountain path to be extremely crowded. Along the way, many of them were grievously injured and even trampled to death. Shortly after, the setting sun summit was emptied. Other than the members from the Seven Mysteries sect, there was no one else. Wang Juechu was astonished and elated. Never would he have thought that the danger his sect faced would be so easily averted, or that Jia Tianlong would be destroyed so forcefully. However, there were also traces of uneasiness in his heart despite his happiness. He knew that since Han Li could easily avert their disaster, he could also pressure the Seven Mysteries sect with ease, or even destroy it, causing them to become the current feral wolf gang. As sect leader Wang thought of this, traces of worry once again appeared in his initially relaxed heart. Involuntarily, his gaze shifted to the center of the arena.
Aye. Where's Dr. Han?
The shocked sect leader Wang drew in a sharp breath. Earlier, that indeterminable expert, Han Li, had disappeared without a trace.
Did anyone see Dr. Han? No idea. Didn't notice.
Almost everyone in the crowd had no idea where Han Li went, but this was only to be expected. After all, their attention had been fixed on the method that Han Li used to burn his opponents. Who would dare to turn their gaze from that inhumane monster because of his ghostly body movements? If Han Li didn't want them to track his movements, it would be extremely simple to achieve.
There's no need to look for him anymore. I saw that he had mixed himself with the crowd and has already departed from Setting Sun Summit.
Many gray-robed men opened their mouths and asserted this once their countenance recovered.
Already left? Where was he going?
Sect leader Wang had a complicated look on his face. He bitterly smiled, murmuring to himself. As he contemplated his surroundings, his gaze landed onto the uncertain corpse. Wang Juechu's eyes suddenly shined with a bright light as his lips curled into a smile, revealing the look of a crafty old cheater. At this moment, an incomparably excited Li Feiyu talking to Zhang Xiuer. Because his good friend suddenly exposed himself as a powerful expert, Li Feiyu didn't notice that he became the focus of someone's attention. Just like this, the feral wolf gang and the rest of the invaders retreated rapidly out of the Celestial Rainbow Mountains. They abused their horses, rushing through the night, in order to quickly leave the Seven Mysteries sect's territory, because the power of the Seven Mysteries sect's upper echelon had been severely damaged. Sect leader Wang did not send men to pursue the retreating invaders. That day was an extremely long day. Once the day had passed, both the feral wolf gang and the Seven Mysteries sect laid down their flags and ceased their drum beats, entering a ceasefire to recuperate from their losses. This time around, the battle between both parties was a fight with many twists and turns. Before long, word spread of a legendary immortal, as well as a demonic figure. This legendary tale caused members of both good and evil sects to discuss this topic relentlessly, transforming the story into one that would echo endlessly through multiple generations. In the story, the great battle began with a supreme sword wielder, capable of unleashing sword beams from his sword, fighting against a sword immortal that could fly by stepping on his flying sword. In the end, the sword immortal's flying sword techniques were too mysterious, even mightier than the sword beams, and thus the sword immortal easily defeated the supreme sword user. Making use of this opportunity, a fiery demon suddenly appeared and killed the sword immortal right after the supreme sword user, and the sword immortal had injured each other. The demon also went berserk, invoking his flames to kill over 1,000 spectators. One of the casualties was the unlucky Jia Tianlong, commander of the feral wolf gang. He died without a corpse, disintegrating into dust. At the border of God Hand Valley, Han Li heard the story in which he became a fiery demon from Li Feiyu's mouth. He stood his ground in shock, speechless. Meanwhile, Li Feiyu was cracking up and bending over in laughter to such an extent that he couldn't even straighten his back after half a day. It was noontime, the 5th day after the deathmatch. That night, Han Li silently hid himself within the crowd and left Setting Sun Summit. Once he found Crooked Soul, they returned back to God Hand Valley. Once he was back, he hung a sign that stated that he would refuse to meet with anyone, even the Seven Mysteries sect's highest authority, because of seclusion training. Naturally, because of the fame behind Han Li's name, the top-level figures did not dare to show any sense of dissatisfaction, nor did they dare to intrude God Hand Valley without an invitation. They could only wait obediently outside the valley for a period of time and sigh as they returned back the way they came. During the following days, Han Li began using the dwarf's sword talisman to practice the telekinesis technique. Because he knew that he didn't have much time left, he would practice his telekinesis technique even before the sun rose. Every day, he made the glowing talisman soar through the valley and fly unhindered in a dance until his energy was depleted. Afterward, he would close his eyes to replenish his energy before resuming his practice. In this manner, Han Li repeatedly persisted his dry and dull training that lasted for 3 days until he had fully mastered the initial stage of the telekinesis technique. Telekinesis technique, to propel the talisman, would turn it into a gray streak of light. Although it was incomparably sharp, there were some major limitations when it was put into full use, even though it could cut through nearly everything and attacked according to his will. First of all, propelling this gray light cost too much magic power. Once Han Li cultivated to the 8th layer of Eternal Spring Arts, he could continuously use Fireball technique 100 times. However, when controlling the gray light, his magic power could only persist for a short quarter of an hour before it was completely exhausted. He currently remembered that earlier, Monk Golden Light had not immediately made use of the gray streak. His magic power was far too limited and could only control the talisman for a pitiful amount of time. This explained why he had put up such weak resistance when Han Li seized the gray streak. While the dwarf was controlling the gray streak, the dwarf had probably expended more than half of his magic power. In addition, Han Li's magic power was originally far greater than that of the dwarf's. When contesting in magic power with the dwarf, it was natural for the dwarf to be completely and utterly defeated. In addition, another problem with the gray streak was that its attacking distance was quite limited. The gray streak could only be easily controlled within a radius of about 70 meters. Outside of this range, his control would become rigid and sluggish. Occasionally, he would lose control. When flying outside the range of about 100 meters, the gray streak would completely change back to its true form as a talisman and drop to the ground. With regards to those two flaws, Han Li believed that once his magic power advanced, those problems would gradually be alleviated. However, there was one last problem: the talisman's fatal flaw. After using the talisman several times, Han Li became aware that the cold light emitted from drawing of the small gray sword slowly grew weaker the more he used it. It seemed that its lifespan was gradually reduced. In other words, this talisman had a limited number of uses. When the number of times it could be used passed the limit, it would be completely exhausted and die a ripe death. Once Han Li had somewhat learned to control this gray light, he immediately stopped practicing. After all, he wanted to be able to use this talisman during a crucial moment of dangerous situations. Perhaps in a later crisis, this item would be able to save his tiny life. In the same way, Han Li believed that the golden talisman that could transform into a golden barrier also had a similar restriction. However, for the time being, he didn't know the incantation to use it. He could only store it away and prepare it for future use. After Han Li had rested, he investigated the triangular command medallion and the Qin clan's manual. Unfortunately, he gained nothing from these objects. 5 days passed in this manner. The moment when Han Li removed the sign saying that he would not see others, Li Feiyu rushed in like a fart. When he saw Han Li, he told him about the rumor of him turning into a demon. These rumors left Han Li speechless, not knowing whether to laugh or to cry. He could only harden his face and give Li Feiyu an unhappy look. Li Feiyu was obviously making fun of him. Li Feiyu finally stopped laughing heartily and slowly restrained his smile. He said to Han Li with a solemn voice,
You should be able to guess the reason why I came here.
And is it not because the sect's many elders did not feel at ease with me and sent you to scout out my attitude? Han Li dully replied with indifference.
Heh, as long as you know.
As if he were burdened by the elders' great trust, Li Feiyu let out a sigh.
However, what do you plan to have me, your close friend, report back to those fellows? In order to bribe me, they have already promised to promote me from my position as the External Blade Division's division head.
Li Feiyu immediately smiled mischievously once more. Han Li wrinkled his brows. After thinking about it, he gently said,
It seems that the great sect leader Wang and those previously mentioned elders are uneasy. Let's clear up this matter. Otherwise, they won't be able to feel relieved. Then it will be like this. Return and tell sect leader Wang that at noon tomorrow I will personally go to Setting Sun Summit to see him. Let him know that he does not need to be uneasy.
Han Li said with a smile.
Good. With these words, I can report back.
Li Feiyu shrugged his shoulders with a non-committal answer. After that, Han Li and Li Feiyu wildly chatted for a moment. It had even gone as far as Han Li showing Li Feiyu the fireball technique at close range, greatly opening Li Feiyu's perspective and leaving him envious for the rest of the day. This continued for a short while more before Li Feiyu took his leave, and left the valley to report back to Wang Juechu. Han Li stood at the room's doorway and gazed at Li Feiyu's departing figure from a distance, lost in thought for a long time. He suddenly smiled mysteriously and entered the room, closing the door behind him. The next morning, as the sky grew brighter, Han Li climbed setting sun summit with the utmost secrecy. He continued stealthily until he had entered sect leader Wang's room. When Wang Juechu woke up, he saw the silhouette of a person standing upright next to his bed. His complexion became unsightly, but he managed to squeeze out a stiff smile.
Somewhat unnaturally, he asked, "Dr. Han Li, why did you come? I hope you'll forgive me for not welcoming you. But didn't we agree to meet at noon? Why has your venerable self come so early?"
Han Li coldly glanced at sect leader Wang. This glance made all the hairs on Wang Juechu's body stand on end. Sect leader Wang's face was as if had he suffered the pain from being cut with a knife. Seeing Wang Juechu look frightened, Han Li could not help but be secretly pleased with himself. He looked at Wang Juechu after executing the Heaven's Eye technique, giving himself some particular effects. A few days ago, his research discovered a new use for the Heaven's Eye technique. He could use the Heaven's Eye to cause the spirits of ordinary mortals to be in awe.
There is no reason. I simply felt that if I were to come earlier, everyone's minds might be a bit more clear-headed. That way they wouldn't force any unpleasant affairs upon the other party.
The slightest expression could not be discerned from Han Li's face, although his tone seemed somewhat ill-intentioned. Yesterday, he and the other elders had received Han Li's message from Li Feiyu that he would come to Setting Sun Summit tomorrow at noon. Some of these people had immediately felt that Han Li was far too dangerous and lost their reason, proposing during the meeting to take action and seize the opportunity to kill Han Li. However, this proposition suffered great opposition from a different group. They recognized that such actions were far too dangerous and that they were likely to suffer great retribution if they failed. Those wanting to take action immediately divulged rumors for quite a while and dreamed up many justifications during the night for the purpose of intense refutation. Actually, all of these people were well aware that the accusation that Han Li was far too dangerous was all but just a pretense. There were some people that were envious of his cultivation technique and had planned to conspire against him in order to reap gains from Dr. Han Li. Perhaps even those who opposed the accusations possessed similar intentions. It was just that they would use milder and more covert methods compared to the people who outright conspired against Han Li. In sect leader Wang's presence, both of these groups quarreled with anger and excitement. From the beginning of each meeting to its quick dispersion, no side had truly convinced the other. Instead, they continued to argue garrulously. Finally, when the surviving martial uncle, the gray-clothed man, saw that the conflict showed no signs of settling down, he coldly said a few words to immediately calm everyone down.
"Could it be you aren't afraid of his elders coming to find him after he's killed?"
The gray-clothed man's words were like a bucket of cold water, immediately sobering the elders' feverish minds.
"That's right. Han Li is so young, but he's already this ferocious."
He must definitely have an immortal class elder behind him. Even if we cover up the nature of his death, when his elders come, wouldn't everyone here die a tragic death? When they understood that killing Dr. Han would be equivalent to killing themselves, those who originally advocated an attempt to poison Han Li had completely changed their minds. However, one or two of them were still blinded by greed and persisted, though they now suggested more moderate methods to deal with Han Li instead. Sect leader Wang had just heard Han Li speak some profound words. He felt somewhat guilty and believed that Han Li possessed great magic power. Because Wang Juechu did not know how Han Li had learned the details of the dispute that occurred the day before, he grew even more cautious. However, Wang Juechu had been a sect leader for many years, so his experience and shrewdness were extraordinary. He quickly broke away from the effect of the Heaven Eyes technique and regained his normal expression.
"Medicinal god Han Li, why do you say these words? This entire sect couldn't possibly thank your venerable self enough."
After Wang Juechu had examined the situation, he decided to explore the meaning behind Han Li's words.
Then why did I hear that there were people who wanted to harm me?
Han Li stated in a dull tone while laughing grimly. As sect leader Wang heard this, he was initially frightened, but after looking for signs of anger from Han Li, he soon calmed down slightly. Since Han Li did not speak with an angry tone and had come to see him by himself, he may have simply heard a few rumors without knowing specific details. It seemed that Wang Juechu still had some leeway to repair the relationship between Han Li and the Seven Mysteries sect.
"Medicinal god Han Li might have misunderstood."
Yesterday, A few degenerates had indeed appeared in the sect in an attempt to forget favors and violate justice.
However, please be relieved. These people have long been captured and are under strict observation. The great majority of the sect are nevertheless grateful towards you, Dr. Han. We absolutely wouldn't take actions that would harm our friends and benefit our enemies.
After pondering for a moment, Wang Juechu spoke those words with an awe-inspiring righteousness. Hearing this, Han Li grimly laughed in his heart. Ever since he had revealed his strength and assisted the Seven Mysteries sect, though this calamity, he had reminded himself to be careful of the proverbs.
The birds are gone. The bow is put away. And 2,
destroy the bridge after crossing the river.
He did not believe that the others would have kindness and be thankful towards him, but the hearts of men were truly hard to fathom. He resigned himself to the words that the great men have once said, so long as there were benefits, forgetting favors to violate justice and not recognizing one's family were no less common than drinking water. This was also one of the reasons why he had refused to meet with the conspirators after Han Li had returned to the valley. He had deliberately made these elders cool their heads. Otherwise, the torch of greed would completely burn away their reason. Although he had told Li Feiyu to deliver a message that he would meet with the elders, Han Li did not plan to meet them on schedule. Even though his current strength was far greater than that of an ordinary expert from Jianghu, if the elders were to use a few shameful methods, there would be far too many methods capable of killing him. As a result, he intentionally arrived half a day earlier for the sake of his safety, stealthily meeting with sect leader Wang by himself. Just now, he had merely probed Wang Juechu a little. This great sect leader Wang had revealed all that he originally wished to conceal. It seemed that these 7 mystery sect elders had truly thought over such matters and wanted to act against him. However, this did not matter. Regardless of whether the other party truly wanted to act against him or were just contemplating about it, they would not elicit any anger from him. By the time he finished his business with the #1 figure in the 7 mystery sect, he would have already gone far away. Thus, he would no longer have any relations with them. After looking at Wang Juechu for a moment, he mysteriously said,
I won't speak any more nonsense. I won't hide this from you, sect leader Wang. After this meeting between your venerable self and I will depart from this place and travel to a faraway land. It is very likely that I will not return to the celestial Rainbow Mountains. Before I leave, I wish to make a deal with sect leader that would be beneficial to both parties.
A deal?
Hearing that Han Li would leave, sect leader Wang was stunned. However, after hearing that he wanted to make a deal with him, he was even more bewildered.
What kind of deal can I do for medicinal god Han?
He could not help but be somewhat perturbed. When noon arrived, Han Li did not appear at Setting Sun Summit's sect hall at the time he had originally set. Instead, sect leader Wang arrived to the meeting place last, trembling with excitement.
The great sect leader Wang proclaimed on the spot that they did not need to wait for Han Li because Han Li had already left the celestial Rainbow Mountains. He did not know where he went, but he guessed that Han Li had departed the Jing province and even state of Yue. As a result, all their troubles had already faded away.
When those who were present heard these words, they all widely opened their eyes and looked at each other in shock. The entire meeting room was absolutely silent.
He isn't here anymore?
Then haven't our plans turned to bullshit?
Why? Why did he leave?
These people had helpless thoughts circulating in their heads. TLN, the birds are over, the bow is put away, to get rid of someone once he has served his purpose. To destroy the bridge after crossing the river, to abandon one's benefactor upon achieving one's goal. To forget favors and violate justice, to kick a benefactor in the teeth. Not recognizing one's family, to be self-centered and not make any allowances for the needs of a relative. Not long after Han Li had left the celestial Rainbow Mountains, sect leader Wang announced that he had decided to accept Li Feiyu as his successor and had promoted him from division head deputy to division head of the external blade division. From then on, Wang Juechu had placed an immense amount of care and trust on him. Furthermore, Han Li's third uncle would make a careless blunder and break the sect rules in the future several years from now. When he should have been worrying for his life, sect leader Wang had intervened and defended him. And as for sect leader Wang himself, he became grievously injured after facing several formidable enemies in one of the sect's future conflicts and was drawn to the brink of death. But every time the sect members thought that he would finally succumb to his injuries, sect leader Wang would consume a medicinal pill from a jade bottle and somehow miraculously survive. Not only that, but he could also still prance about, full of vitality. This caused others to feel somewhat jealous, and they probed him for details about the origins of the medicine. But of course, Wang Juechu would never divulge the secret, instead murmuring inconsequential words whenever they asked him. Thus, all those who wanted to know his secret returned empty-handed. After Wang Juechu passed away, he left behind a medicinal pill named
Vitality Raising Pellet.
By this time, there were only 3 pills left inside the jade bottle. These 3 pills caused a storm of blood and brought endless troubles for Wang Juechu's descendants. Nevertheless, these were all events that would take place in the future, so there was no point discussing them right now. As for the current Li Feiyu, he was holding a few bottles in his hand and a paper note. He had just returned back to his residence from Zhang Xiuer's place and discovered several items that suddenly appeared in his house. The paper note was left by Han Li, and the information it contained was very simple. Han Li had left the Seven Mysteries sect and might never return. The note also mentioned that inside the bottles were medicinal pills that he had painstakingly concocted. They would be able to extend Li Feiyu's lifespan, so Han Li hoped that Li Feiyu wouldn't reject his gift. On the back of the paper, there was an impression of Han Li's smiling face near his signature. Adjacent to the smiling face was a sentence congratulating Li Feiyu and Zhang Xiuer, hoping that they would marry soon and have many babies together. After Li Feiyu recovered from his shock, he ran out of his residence and rushed up a small mountain peak that was close to his home. On the mountain peak, Li Feiyu gazed towards the main gate of the Seven Mysteries sect, only to see a field of green. He was unable to discover a single silhouette, but he waited motionlessly for half a day before drawing in a huge breath.
Take care of yourself. I wish you well on your future path.
Only then did Li Feiyu slowly descend from the mountain peak. Depression emanated from his lonely back. At this moment, a horse-drawn carriage was trotting on the pathway, heading east. Han Li and Crooked Soul were sitting inside the carriage, although this 4-wheeled carriage was not that cramped. Han Li had spent 3 taels of silver and temporarily rented the vehicle so that only the 2 of them were within the carriage. This wooden carriage appeared worn and tattered on the surface, but the interior was actually extremely clean and tidy. Not only that, the 2 horses that were pulling the carriage were at the prime of their life, filled with strength and vitality. With vigorous strength, they pulled the carriage along with such swiftness that it could be comparable to flying. It was precisely because Han Li had noticed these 2 details that he was willing to spend 3 taels of silver to rent the carriage. Normally, only 1 tael of silver would be sufficient to rent this kind of carriage. The driver was a skinny, tanned, middle-aged commoner who refused to partake in conversation. Other than the time Han Li had initiated a conversation and asked for directions, he wouldn't speak any unnecessary words, making Han Li feel satisfied. Next to Han Li was Crooked Soul, who had an immense stature and a mask to cover its face, making it seem extremely mysterious. If the driver was a gossip, there would surely be many troubles. The intelligent, yellow-feathered, cloud-winged bird stood on Han Li's shoulder. Its eyes were half closed, as if it were resting. Crooked Soul, who was in the seat facing Han Li, carried a large package. Other than some clean clothes, the package contained gold, silver, and some bottles that were pretty heavy. As for the rest, such as Dr. Mo's will and certain small miscellaneous items, Han Li carried them on his body, out of fear that he would misplace them. Han Li sat quietly in the carriage, listening to the sounds the wooden wheels made as they turned, with no fluctuation in his expression. There was no reason for him to be downcast about leaving the Seven Mysteries sect. The only thing that he would not bear to leave behind was his intimate friend, Li Feiyu. But with the knowledge that his counterpart had received his note and the pills that he had concocted, Han Li hoped that these would be sufficient enough for Li Feiyu to carry out the second half of his life in peace. Thinking of this, he stretched his body, rested his back on the cushioned seats, and dozed off. As for his destination, he had already informed the driver earlier, the small village from which he had originated. Although he knew that it was impossible, he hoped beyond hope that, the moment he opened his eyes, he would be able to see the faces of his family surrounding him. He had left home for so many years that their faces had long blurred in his memory. Thus, before Han Li truly started on the next leg of his journey, he needed to see his family members one last time. If not, his heart would never be at ease.
I wonder how my little sister is doing right now. She should already be 16 or 17, a grown woman. According to the letters that I received, it seems that she was betrothed to a good family and is currently preparing to get married.
A weak and small figure appeared in Han Li's mind just as he was falling asleep. The owner of this figure was always behind him, calling out,
Fourth brother, fourth brother.
Time truly passes by extremely fast. In this warm atmosphere with his own memories, Han Li fell asleep. This time he slept soundly and was at peace, similar to the times when he was young and his parents were beside him, protecting him from danger. After 5 days of traveling along the yellow earthen path, Han Li finally saw a village far off in the distance. There was the low wall made of mud, the rows of rice paddies, and that bumpy road full of potholes. All this had once captivated Han Li, so the extent that he had dreamt about it daily. Now it finally appeared in front of his eyes. Han Li suppressed the excitement in his heart. He allowed the driver to stop the carriage far outside the village, while Crooked Soul remained in the carriage. Then, Han Li walked towards the direction of the village. As he walked through the village entrance, he heard a burst of joyous sounds from musical instruments. Strangely, not a single person could be seen as he walked through the village's small streets. Han Li's heart stirred. The empty streets and the joyous sounds were memories from his childhood that he couldn't be more familiar with. This was clearly someone's wedding celebration. Everyone in the village would celebrate and join in on the fun. Han Li lifted his spirits and slowly spread out his spiritual sense. By doing so, he discovered that both young and old had gathered together at the village center as he expected. However, the place they had gathered at felt so familiar to Han Li. Was this not the house where he had lived? Han Li was surprised by no small amount.
Could it be?
Han Li had a faint guess at last. He sped up his pace, hastily passing by many households and turning many corners until he saw the sight before him. Several hundred villagers were surrounding an earthen courtyard. Inside the courtyard, there were many tile-roofed houses that were in better condition than the houses nearby. A large banner with celebratory words hung from each entrance. In addition, there was a small group of instrumental performers that was making quite a bit of noise at the front of the courtyard. There were some villagers who stood, others who crouched, and a few who were not paying attention and simply sitting on the ground. Gathered into groups of 3 and 4, they whispered and sometimes engaged in heated arguments. Some continued to look at the courtyard with envy. In addition, there were many children joyfully chasing one another under adult supervision. Seeing this familiar scene, Han Li's mind was distracted for a time. In this split second, it was as if he had returned to his childhood from long ago and was with the other children, chasing them while making lots of noise.
Z's. The Han family's 4th daughter truly has good fortune. I heard the husband is a state official from the city, a truly studious and scholarly individual. Truly? And she is going to be his legal wife? She's going to have the status of an official's wife. I heard that the Han family had delivered a frighteningly large dowry, several dozen taels of snowflake silver. They are truly wealthy.
The village women's noisy gossiping roused Han Li from his stupor.
The Han family's 4th daughter? Isn't that my little sister? Could it truly be the day of my little sister's wedding?
Han Li felt a burst of vague emotions continuously surging inside him. Though what he thought remained a mystery, Han Li hid behind a large nearby tree several steps away, attentively and unwaveringly staring at the courtyard gate. Suddenly, someone shouted from a distance,
"The sedan chair has arrived. The groom has come to receive the bride."
Upon hearing these words, the villagers were in an uproar, instantly becoming a boiling cauldron of voices.
"The bride has emerged. The bride has emerged. Quickly come and see."
The clamoring even surpassed that of the shrilling children. Han Li's spirit shook as he fervently continued to watch the courtyard gate. Creak. The wooden courtyard gate opened. More than a dozen men and women came out, escorting a young woman wearing a red wedding dress in between them. This young woman's chin was sharp, and her appearance was graceful, belonging to a girl 16 or 17 years old. At this moment, her face was bashful. Han Li widely opened his eyes and attentively observed this young woman's appearance, trying to find some resemblance with the little sister from his memories. Aside from her general facial appearance and the corner of her eyes, he found no other trace of familiarity from his olden days. The rest of her appearance could no longer be associated with the little sister from his memories.
Sigh. A girl changes 8 times from childhood to womanhood. These words truly make sense.
Han Li bitterly smiled and then swept his gaze to the people at her side.
This fatty is 3rd uncle. I can already tell who he is with a single look. He's just as fat as before. That large tanned person at the side is eldest brother Han Tai. That woman close to his side should be his wife.
Han Li's mouth muttered as he called their names out one by one. This somehow made him relax a little. When his gaze fell upon an old, gray-haired couple, Han Li ceased speaking. Motionless, he blankly stood behind the tree. his expression became extremely complicated. Among these emotions included happiness, timidness, and bewilderment. His parents had aged far greater than Han Li had anticipated. When he had gone up the mountains, he remembered that his mother's hair was jet black. However, all of her hair was now ash-colored. Furthermore, his father's originally straight back was now hunched over. Han Li remained speechless, while his mind became dizzy like a ball of paste. Because of everything that had occurred, he didn't notice that it was already dawn. By the time he cleared his head, his little sister had already sat in the red silk sedan chair and was carried off into the distance. Following closely behind was a scholar mounted on a large cyan horse. Han Li focused his sight to look at the sedan chair that was moving further away. He gazed at his parents in the crowd, and then closed his eyes. After he had deeply engraved the appearances of his parents and several kin into his heart, he turned around. His face expressed unwavering determination as he walked toward the village's exit with large strides. Han Li knew that if he were to walk across the village entrance once more, he would come across these people and spend the rest of his life here. He clearly knew that ever since he had gained insights in the eternal spring arts and learned about the existence of immortal cultivation, he had walked on a path completely different from that of ordinary mortals. Regardless of whether there would be misfortune or happiness, prosperity or hardship, he would never regret his choice. Translator's note: thank you for reading. This is the end of RMJI Book 1. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far. It is located in the southern region of the state of Yue. Despite its small size, it is said to be quite wealthy, second only to the Xin province. With fertile land, countless rivers, lakes, and canals running through the region, as well as constant favorable weather, the province was extremely suited to growing grain and rice. Thus, it became the state's largest producer of crops. Located in the center of Lan Province was Jiayuan City. Although it wasn't the Lan Province's capital, it was without question the largest city in its province. The Great Lu Canal, which spanned from the north to the south of the province, passed through the center of the city. In addition, several roads and waterways also ran through the city. As a result, the city's transportation was highly developed and could be considered the hub of water transportation, as well as the main road of trade and commerce in the region. Every year, an innumerous amount of merchants and travelers passed through, spurring an enormous amount of trade at this location. Therefore, the fact that Jiayuan City became the largest city in the province was not strange in the least. In Jiayuan City, there was traffic of all sorts. Docks and boatmen were numerous and could be found anywhere in the city. Boatmen, cart drivers, and unskilled laborers were as many as number of the hairs on an ox. There were several tens of thousands of people, including Sun Ergu, who relied on the harbor to make a living, and Ergu meaning second dog. Like his name suggested, Sun Ergu had long, slanted eyebrows and crooked eyes. In addition, he had the appearance of a ruffian, a cross between a rotten pear and a spoiled jujube. However, because he was skilled in flattery and reading body language, he had actually been able to secure the position of minor gang leader. Managing several tens of unskilled porters, he made a living off the harbor transporting the goods and luggage of passing merchants. This was the reason why Sun Ergu's many subordinates had hastily gathered at early dawn and respectfully addressed him with,
Good morning, Grandpa Grandpa has come.
Hearing these greetings, Sun Ergu could not help but be somewhat smug. After all, being addressed as
Grandpa
indicated that here he was someone of status. Consequently, he exhibited an air of arrogance. He finally responded to his subordinates' greetings after snorting from his nose.
Who is Grandpa Shouldn't it be Grandpa Ergu?
It should, but here, there's only a two-legged dog imitating a man.
Haha. Haha.
The burst of mocking and ridicule could not mask the words that entered Ergu's ear. After Sun Ergu had heard this, his face suddenly sunk, and his mood dropped in an instant. He slowly turned his head and looked to the several tens of people at the other side of the dock. He brought his gaze down to a large, burly, dark-skinned man as a hint of hate flashed in his eyes. Among all the people that Sun Ergu hated the most in the entire city of Jiayuan, this large, dark-skinned man would absolutely make it into his top 3. If someone were to tell him that he or she would use the wealth of Sun Ergu's entire family to thoroughly make this large, dark-skinned man disappear from the world, Sun Ergu might hesitate, but if he or she changed it to only half of Sun Ergu's wealth, he wouldn't hesitate to agree in the least. Naturally, this was because he led a life of decadence. The so-called entirety of his family's wealth wasn't much to begin with. No one had known what the dark-skinned man's name was for quite a long time. The people at the harbor either addressed him as
Grandpa Black, or his nickname, Black Bear.
he was the leader of the small gang.
Iron Fist Group, while Sun Ergu held a similar status in the 4th level gang.
As a result, these factions had arrived at this dock to supervise the porters of their respective sides. A mountain cannot hold 2 tigers, let alone this minuscule dock. As a result, the 2 gangs have had tense relations since. After several conflicts over merchant customers, their relationships grew even more vile. Whenever the 2 gangs saw each other, they would sneer in contempt and shove each other aside, falling short of a full-on conflict. If the subordinates acted in this manner, then what was there to say about the greatest beneficiaries of the business here, Sun Ergu and Black Bear? These 2 figures looked at each other with great dislike. However, as the young gang leaders, these 2 knew that the Iron Fist Group and the 4th level gang were allied gangs. They had united to fend off the comparatively larger
Poison Dragon Gang.
As a result, although the 2 had wanted to drive the other away from this place and monopolize the dock, they could only restrain themselves for the time being. However, they accumulated resentment and fury against one another and vented their feelings through their subordinates' verbal conflicts. Their exchange of insults had become a common occurrence that took place every morning. As a matter of fact, Sun Ergu's subordinates did not even wait to initiate a conflict. Many clever, eloquent subordinates struck back without a trace of politeness.
Do you know what animal is the most stupid of them all? Bears. Which of bears are the most stupid? Black bears, without a doubt.
When Black Bear had originally heard his own subordinates ridicule the other party, his face wore a proud expression. However, his elated face darkened after hearing these words. Sun Ergu started to smile. Pleased, he patted the shoulders of several subordinates to further encourage them. Black Bear's subordinates were not to be outdone. Those on Sun Ergu's side were not polite either. A great deal of filthy words spurted out from both sides. Everyone became each other's old grandpa, and neither side feared the other. Naturally, the conflict at the dock was not pleasant to hear. Vulgar unpleasantries of all kinds were exchanged. As the leaders of their respective gangs, Sun Ergu and Black Bear coolly looked at each other. Since they were people with status, they naturally could not join in the abusive, quarrelsome racket. Just as these 2 sides' mouths and tongues were about to dry, saliva suddenly splattered. One of Sun Ergu's subordinates cried out in alarm.
A boat is drawing near.
These words roused Black Bear's near 100 cursing subordinates, who all exhaled in surprise. They all stopped making noise and immediately turned their gazes toward the riverbank. After all, shining white silver was far more attractive than the fleeting verbal delight. However, when Black Bear's group looked toward the boat in the dock, they were somewhat disappointed. It was only a small flatboat. At best, it would only have 3 to 5 merchant customers, which was not a large amount of business at all. This was not surprising, given that this dock was rotten and small. In addition, its location was far from the city. Under these circumstances, it was only natural that no big boats would come here. However, during peak season for trade and commerce, other docks would have no space for large boats, so merchants would have no choice but to disembark here. After this small boat stopped at the dock, 2 people climbed off board. One appeared to be a common youngster about 17 to 18 years old. The other was a large man, at least 2 heads taller than an ordinary person. The youngster wore a common azure garment, and a small yellow bird perched on his shoulder. Just as he stepped off board, he looked around. He had the appearance of a rural villager that had entered the city for the first time. The huge man wore a green gown and a mantle over his head. His facial appearances were unclear because he wore his clothes in a strange manner. The huge man followed close behind the youngster, refusing to fall even a step behind. Based on his appearance, it seemed that he was a servant. The huge man and the youngster were actually Han Li and Crooked Soul. They had traveled on the road for 3 consecutive months before arriving at Dr. Mo's homeland. TL note, this is the start of Book 2. You're in for a great ride. Please check out our Patreon or donate if you are able. It greatly helps the translation effort and will increase the release rate.